Well, here we are, the fourth Sunday in a sermon series of 4. You know, when we do our planning each year, 4 Sundays seems like a lot of time, a lot of opportunity to explore a topic. Yet we end each wanting more, knowing that we've barely scratched the surface. And this series has been rich, much to think about and even to apply, practically speaking, in our everyday lives. The first week, we took a dive into self-differentiation, noting the need for each of us to be like a cell with walls and membranes and boundaries to even exist. And yet cells need to join with other cells in order to fulfill the function for which they were created. Week number 2 brought an even deeper dive into self-differentiation, defining and knowing oneself while staying in relationship with those around us, even and perhaps especially those with whom we disagree. It's about the ways in which we find ourselves responding maturely and not falling into that reactionary mode. And it's as true for a group of people, such as a congregation, as much as it is for an individual. Last week, we were encouraged to find meaningful community in a world that is becoming increasingly isolated and lonely. A community where we can share our lives appropriately and grow closer to one another and to God through our relationships without violating healthy boundaries. And so, in thinking about a good direction for this morning's theme on relationship boundaries, it didn't take long for me to realize that over the years, a struggle has been remembering and knowing how to draw healthy boundaries by just saying no. By nature, I'm a yes person, and I have a hunch that I'm not alone in that. When it comes to just saying no, I do need to add one disclaimer, is that I have not arrived yet. I don't have all the answers, but I want to explore it more, to learn more, to practice saying no, and to find a freedom in that learning. When I say yes all too quickly, sometimes, and maybe even many, many times, I take on more than I should, or agree all too readily to something that I really don't want to agree to. In a culture that understands best yes, how do we help each other say no? It's not a new phenomenon. It's part of being humankind. Somewhere around the year 400 AD, Constantine said, "God is always trying to give good things to us, but our hands are too full to receive them." And so we'll turn to the scriptures for some guidance. At first, I looked at scriptures on Sabbath. And there we find great reminders that even God rests. God said no to working on that seventh day. God takes a break. Then I thought about Paul's writings and his everyday wisdom for living a life of abundance. And then I wondered what Jesus' life and teachings would have for us. And so I explored the Gospels, and here are a few passages that might be instructive to us. This is from the Gospel of Luke, and I think the screen is not responding. Now it is? Okay, from Luke 5. Now more than ever, the word about Jesus spread abroad. Many crowds would gather to hear him and to be cured of their diseases, but he would withdraw to deserted places and to pray. In order to find time to recharge, Jesus said no, as he withdrew from the crowds who clamored for him. He knew he needed that one-on-one time with God. In Luke 4, when the crowds, had heard this, and this is in Jesus' hometown, his hometown folks in Nazareth, when the crowds, had heard this, all in the synagogue were filled with rage. They got up, drove him out of the town, and led him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built, so that they might hurl him off the cliff. But he passed through the midst of them and went on his way. And I think, if that's not an excellent example of self-differentiation, I don't know what is. Jesus kept his focus, and with this violent crowd, he walked right through that threatening group. From Matthew 11, "Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus knew and he taught the importance of self-care. And from Matthew 6, but whenever you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray. Again, making self-care a priority. And from Matthew 5, let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one. Jesus taught to stay focused on who we are and to what God is calling us. The Gospels paint a well-balanced picture of Jesus, a man who ate healthy foods, who got the sleep he needed, who took time to relax and get away from the hustle and the bustle to restore his soul. Traveling over and around the Palestinian hillsides, he got a lot of exercise as he walked virtually everywhere. There was no Uber for Jesus. He had personal needs that he made priority, sometimes even over the needs of those around him. And he appeared to do so without feeling guilty or apologizing. Jesus lived a life of rhythm that not only kept him free from burnout, but far beyond that, it filled his spirit, full of God, and therefore ready to be compassionate and generous in his response to people, their needs, interruptions, and crises when they arose. His relationship with God was his source of energy and focus, drawing clear boundaries, including saying no. Now, I must confess, and I don't think this will rock your socks, I am a people pleaser. For many of us, it's become an ingrained habit. The more we do it, the more entrenched the habit becomes. We can be on autopilot, agreeing to do things, to say yes before we even realize it. In a sense, we've wired our brains to respond in that way whenever people ask things of us. As a little girl growing up in the 50s and 60s, my highest aspiration was to be a nice girl. As a child, saying yes was the nice thing to do and often resulted in approval of authority figures. And we learned that by saying yes, we could make other people happy. Conversely, we learned vicariously that saying no could be construed as impolite or inappropriate. And for the most part, saying yes comes from a really good place. We want to be helpful to others. Several years ago, when we were first married with a baby or two, a friend of mine was just starting out on his own. He had landed his first job after completing schooling, and he needed a car, but he didn't have any credit rating yet. So he asked me if I would co-sign a loan to purchase a modest vehicle. I knew that this car was very important to my friend, and he didn't have a lot of other support to help him with it. And I could tell that he really wanted me. He needed me, I thought, to say yes. I could see it in his eyes and the expression on his face. And I wanted more than anything to say yes. I would want somebody to do the same for me. After talking with Dave about it, we decided that I couldn't say yes because we too were just starting out and would not have been able to take on his debt if that need arose. All these years later, I still remember how really difficult it was for me to say no, but it was the right thing to do. You know, there are lots of reasons that we say yes when no may be the better answer. We want to avoid disappointing people like my friend. Had I said yes, it surely would have stressed me, and there's a good chance I would have resented signing that loan. We want to avoid seeming selfish. We want others to like us. We don't want to offend anyone. Many of us are averse to conflict, and we fear missing out. And this is pretty cool. Missing out on opportunities. Fear missing out. There's an acronym for it now, FOMO. We're afraid that we're going to miss something. And I think this one was really probably the most difficult for me. There are so many good things that come our way. There are invitations, activities, adventures, and I can't resist the opportunity for a new adventure. And of course, who knows if this opportunity will ever present itself again, right? Some research has suggested that social media only reinforces this tendency. When we're constantly looking at Facebook and watching others post their experiences, we might be more inclined to say yes to something because we don't want to feel left out or unadventuresome, that FOMO, that fear of missing out. Well, the problem isn't that we say yes to opportunities. The problem is that oftentimes we fail to discern carefully between good opportunities and great ones, and we stretch ourselves too thin by saying yes. There's only so much time in a day, and we can't do everything. That means that each time we say yes to something, we tacitly say no to something else. By declining some offers, we allow ourselves the freedom to say yes to those that might come along and be a better fit. According to business magnate and philanthropist Warren Buffett, the difference between successful people and very successful people is that very successful people say no to almost everything. So, how do we say no in healthy ways? How can we break that ingrained behavior of being a people pleaser? I have a book that gives a number of examples of how to just say no. And among the many chapters is how to say no to your spouse. So I thought, because this is so out of character, I thought I'd use an example, and Dave knows this is coming, how I might say no to Dave. Okay, here's the scenario. This is crazy. Suppose you dislike loud, raucous concerts. It hurts your ears, it's hot, crowded, stuffy, smoky, and you're concerned for your safety in the rowdy crowds. So let's say your spouse, in this case Dave, asks you to accompany him to a heavy metal concert. That's not going to happen, but we'll go with it anyhow. All right, here's what the book says. This is how you might answer that. Thanks for asking me, honey, but I'd rather not go. I really don't enjoy those type of concerts. If you'd like to invite a friend to go with you, please do, and then we can have a date night another time. So really, that is a good example. To be direct, to be clear, to be straightforward, and it's okay to cushion that with kindness or a compliment. It lets the other person know that you care, and in this case, it's your spouse. So how did that feel? We'll debrief at lunch, okay? Well, here are a couple of other examples from this book. Perhaps in response to an invitation to accept an extra project at work, which is more than you might want to take on, you might say, wow, this sounds like a great opportunity, but I'll have to pass. Thank you for considering me. That's kind. Or in response to an invite from a friend, a trip to Timbuktu sounds fun, thanks. Unfortunately, I won't have the time to swing it this summer. And if you're not interested in leaving the door open for another time, be even clearer with something like, I'm not really interested in visiting Timbuktu, but I thank you for thinking of me. Resist the urge to offer excuses and don't stall for time. Don't say, I'll think about it, if you already know that you really don't want to do it. Describe your lack of bandwidth. I don't have enough time to help you move today. And for FOMO, for that fear of missing out, experts say, take a breath. Take a moment to think it over. Is it really something worth committing to? Life is too short to spend energy on choices that don't engage our mind or our hearts. By saying no to these opportunities, we might just be saying yes to ourselves, and that's a really beautiful thing. Our family's lives changed in a day just 2 months ago in September with my breast cancer diagnosis. All of a sudden, the same things didn't matter anymore. Spontaneously, our family said no to the other demands in their lives and came home that first weekend so that we could be together around the dining room table and to eat together because we needed one another. Relationships matter. Spending time together matters. And I realize all too keenly that carving out that time to be together means saying no to other things, even for a recovering people pleaser like me. I want to just say no to distractions that sap time and energy, and I want to say yes to life. And you can hold me accountable, and I will hold you accountable. I think that's the beauty of a vibrant and loving faith community. We share our lives together, we support one another, we remind one another that it's okay to just say no. We're coming to a time of anointing this morning, If you're not familiar with anointing, it's applying olive oil to one's forehead in a blessing. God to hold you, Christ to free you, symbolizing an openness to whatever peace and blessings that God might have for you. Maybe you yearn, like me, to be free to just say no more often. Or maybe you too are a people pleaser and you want to break that habit. Perhaps you're a caregiver, but struggle with caring for self. Maybe this Thanksgiving, you, like me, are overwhelmed with gratitude and want to express your thankfulness to a generous and loving God. Whatever the reason, come forward as you feel led and receive the fullness of God's blessings.